Alright, good evening everyone. This is John Tapp with the Mack R. This is going to be classic for you guys. So, happy spring. We're going to start with Wichita, Kansas, since I'm going to be driving early. And since we're on our own, but we didn't get any DoorDash orders. So, we just got some leftovers at all, and before they get thrown in the trash. So anyway, let's all
keep right, and then turn right.
Let's go to the Dollar General.
Turn right.
And get the items I needed to deliver for Kansas, and let's all drive.
Keep right, and then turn right. Turn right. It's all over there. Drive safe.
Hamas since Israel broke the ceasefire in Gaza earlier this week and resumed the war there. Israeli strikes have so far killed more than 500 Palestinians since Tuesday, including many children, and they've wounded hundreds more, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. NPR's Hadil El-Shalchi joins us now with the latest from Tel Aviv. Hi, Andy.
Hello.
Okay, so it was a really early morning for all of you in Tel Aviv, right?
Yeah, that's right. So the first siren went off at around 4 a.m. Israel time. People scrambled to the shelters in their buildings, their neighborhoods. The Iran-backed Houthis later claimed responsibility for firing a missile from Yemen. And they said their target was Ben Gurion Airport. It saw some disruption to flights, but then it got up and running very quickly. And then in the mid-afternoon, more sirens rang across the city. And you could hear these very loud explosions in the sky. And those were the rockets being intercepted by the very powerful Israeli Iron Dome missile defense system. The Israeli military said the afternoon projectiles, which Hamas claimed responsibility for, were fired from southern Gaza, and they were all intercepted or fell into open areas. There were no casualties.
And as we said, this is the first response from Hamas since Israel ended the ceasefire on Tuesday. And yesterday, an Israeli ground invasion started. What do we know about that operation?
Right. So Israel is calling this, quote, limited ground operation into central and southern Gaza. It says it wants to expand its security perimeter that separates Gaza from southern Israel. The Israeli military also said that it had taken parts of the Netzarim corridor, which divides south and north Gaza. This is a fortified strip of land that troops had withdrawn from at the beginning of the ceasefire in January. And this is, making Palestinians worried that the passage between the north and the south will be shut off again, like it was earlier in the war, separating people from their homes, their families.
Yeah. Can you tell us more about what you are hearing from Palestinians living in Gaza right now?
I mean, Elsa, there is a lot of fear. NPR's Gaza producer, MS Baba, was at the Indonesian hospital in Beit Lahia in the north today. The town was struck by Israeli warplanes overnight. Health officials said dozens were killed there, including entire families. At the hospital, NS said that the floors were covered in blood, bodies laid on the ground, wrapped in shrouds. NS spoke to Yusuf Abu Habib. Abu Habiba says, we were just sitting at home just before dawn when the strikes happened. There was one, then two, then a third strike. He says his brother and other relatives were all killed.
Adil, can you just explain for us, as far as we know, why did Israel end the ceasefire and resume the war?
So this is a pressure tactic to get Hamas to accept an extension of the first phase of the ceasefire deal. Let me just remind you, the first phase ended on March 1st. Over 6 weeks, Hamas released 33 hostages. Israel freed almost 2,000 Palestinian prisoners and detainees from Israeli jails. And then the second phase was supposed to have seen a total withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza and a permanent end to the war. But instead of starting those second phase talks, Israel came back and said it wanted this extension of the first phase, where it demanded Hamas return half the living hostages still held in Gaza. Hamas said it had held up its part of the deal, refused the extension, and so Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered the resumption of the war. And just today, the White House said that President Trump, quote, fully supports Israel and the Israeli military and the actions that they've taken in Gaza in recent days.
That is NPR's Hadil El-Shalchi in Tel Aviv. Thank you so much, Hadil.
You're very welcome.
Democrats in Congress are holding town halls around the country. They're hearing grievances from their constituents about the actions of the Trump administration and how the Democratic Party is responding. NPR congressional correspondent Barbara Sprunt reports on one town hall in Colorado.
19-year-old Jackson Armenta was one of nearly 1,000 people who gathered in Golden, Colorado, about 15 miles west of Denver, to hear directly from Democrats they elected about what's happening in Washington. Armenta worries Republican plans could put programs like Medicaid on the chopping block.
My grandma, she's 70 years old and has to work 40 hours to even survive day to day. And my mom has double upper extremity limb loss, and so she's on disability, and that's how she survives. We just want to make sure our family's gonna, make it through the next 4 years. As dramatic as that sounds, everything's really scary right now.
Armenta's concerned Democrats don't have a unified strategy of fighting back, pointing to a vote last week on a GOP spending bill. All but one House Democrat voted against it, but 10 Democrats in the Senate, led by Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, voted to advance it, saying the bill was bad, but a government shutdown would course. Armenta said that if that was the thinking all along, then leaders should have made that clear.
It felt like, leading up to the vote, it was, we're going to fight this. We will shut the government down. And then the vote came, and it was full 180.
Frustration about party leadership wasn't only coming from the people in the seats, it also came from people on stage. Senator Michael Bennett was asked this about Schumer.
When will you be calling for him to be replaced as minority leader? Thank you.
Bennett said it's critical for the public to know what Democrats are fighting for, and he didn't think that was clear last week.
I do think on the leadership question, it's always better to, examine whether folks are in the right place, and we're certainly going to have that conversation.
He recalled how he was the first Senate Democrat to say he didn't think then-President Joe Biden could win re-election after his poor debate performance.
It's important for people to know, when it's time to go. And I think in the case of Joe Biden, and we're going to have conversations, I'm sure, in the foreseeable future about all of them.
Attendees pressed Bennett and fellow Colorado Democratic Congresswoman Brittany Pedersen on what steps their party can take to combat the dismantling of the federal government. Both talked about the importance of public unity, mobilizing ahead of the midterms, and bringing frustrations to Republican lawmakers.
Just because we're not in power does not mean we're powerless. And I think that is the frustration that people feel right now, is that even though we are not in the majority, I think we need a level set on what is possible, but also how important all of you are in showing up and fighting back.
But that wasn't satisfying to some in the crowd. Amanda, who introduced herself without her last name, got up during Q&A and said she's exasperated.
I have heard a lot of other people ask, is there a plan? Is there a plan? And it really doesn't seem like there's a plan.
A reminder of the intense pressure congressional Democrats are under. Their base wants them to do big, bold things, but they lost the midterms, and they don't have a lot of concrete power on Capitol Hill. And Bennett said pushing back isn't enough.
This party needs a new plan for the future that is compelling for the American people and that speaks to working people.
But he says
it's not going to be with the same old playbook, and it may not be with the same old people, to be honest.
which raises the question, if not the same people, then who? Barbara Sprent, NPR News, Golden, Colorado.
You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News. Commercial shipping companies are closely watching a new U.S. military offensive in the Red Sea off the coast of Yemen. The targets are Houthi rebels who, for more than a year, have been attacking ships, choking off transit in one of the world's most critical waterways. The Pentagon says it will stay on the offensive until the Houthis stop the attacks, but even then, it's not clear ships will race back to the Red Sea. NPR International Affairs correspondent Jackie Northam reports.
Houthi militants began regularly targeting military and commercial ships passing through the Red Sea shortly after the Gaza war started in 2023, hitting about 100 vessels and sinking 2. That stopped once Israel and Hamas declared a ceasefire. But after Israel cut off the flow of humanitarian aid and then launched a new offensive on Gaza, Houthis announced they will renew attacks. The target is any vessel associated with Israel.
It's a gray zone because when does a vessel belong to a certain country? That's not as easy as you might think.
Lars Jensen is CEO of Vespucci Maritime, a Copenhagen-based advisory service. He says given the complex nature of the shipping industry, it's difficult to determine a ship's link to Israel.
Are you looking at who is operating the ship, who is owning the ship, which ports are the ship calling, who has got cargo on board? So there's a multitude of definitions. So there's a lot of ships that fall within that target range,
including the U.S. Jensen says the risks for ship transiting through the Red Sea right now are enormous.
If you are attacked by the Houthis, a worst case scenario is, of course, you lose your ship. Now, if I got a fairly small vessel, I'm looking at a potential loss of maybe $10, $20 million. If you're talking one of the large container ships, the value of the ship and the cargo can easily be $1 billion.
What with the increased risk of attacks and rising insurance premiums, major shipping companies have chosen to divert from the Red Sea, instead going around South Africa, adding costs, time, and shaking up global supply chains. Basil Karagias, CEO of New Jersey-based Karagias Maritime Advisors, says the year-long disruption by Houthi attacks is bad for shipping, and he applauds Trump's efforts to launch an offensive. The first airstrikes against militants began last weekend.
We have to make sure that waters globally are free of risks like that. But I'm not sure if it's properly done. I think it needs to be much more orchestrated.
Karagias says the Houthis don't have large military bases. They can fire a missile or a drone at a commercial ship to keep the area destabilized. Karagias says the U.S. needs to coordinate with allies for a more effective operation.
You have to have a constant presence over there, first of all, to escort and help all the merchant marine traffic. And then, you have to keep constantly hitting them any chance of they show up on the radar.
In early 2024, the Biden administration mounted a coalition of about 20 countries to help secure the Red Sea, but it wasn't able to permanently curb the threat by Houthis. Jonathan Roach, an analyst at Braemar ACM Shipbroking in London, says even if this latest U.S. operation can't stop Houthi attacks, shipping companies will wait before reworking their routes and head back to the Red Sea.
When you're operating a liner company or an alliance, you need to be certain changing things probably to take good 3 to 6 months of no hostilities, container ships, although actually risk it.
Uncertainty in the Middle East is a rare commodity. Jackie Northam, NPR News.
At 5:48 on a Thursday afternoon, it's All Things Considered on your NPR station, News 87. 70 degrees right now here at the UH campus. I'm Nick Pittman, back out to the Gulf Freeway, southbound 45 minutes. It's going to be about 25 minutes or so to make the trip from Edgeburg to El Dorado. That's where the remnants of a car fire is still blocking the right lane and the exit to El Dorado. Meanwhile, on 288 heading in northbound, all clear at Reed, where an earlier car fire blocked the managed and the main lanes. Those main lanes have been slowed inside the belt. Still ahead, we'll have a follow-up on a man arrested during an immigration raid northeast of Houston. That's in local news with Gail Water at 6:04. And look at the possible future of the Department of Education following the president's latest executive action. That's at 6:06.
Support comes from Specs, offering Texas-made spirits, brews, and wine, including Hill Country Wine, Lone Star State Whiskey, and more. Details at specsonline.com. The fun starts here.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from Lockton, dedicated to helping navigate the complexities of employee benefits and understand pros and cons of health plan options to cover weight loss drugs. More on the news and insights page at lockton.com.
Support comes from Pearland, Texas, offering new construction with custom options and amenities, mature neighborhoods filled with trees, and urban living. Details at pearlandedc.com/inspiration. Pearland, inspiration lives here. Support comes from Roku, presenting Voices of Vietnam with new music by Viet Quang, featuring tenor Nicholas Pan and traditional performer Va'ain Vanessa Vo. March 29th at Asia Society Texas Center. ROCO.org.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Elsa Chang. If you're feeling lonely right now in your life, you are not alone. 1/3 of Americans report feeling lonely at least once a week, and 16% of Americans report feeling lonely all or most of the time. Now, there are a lot of theories for why we're all feeling so lonely, and I'm actually joined by Brittany Luce, host of NPR's It's Been a Minute, to talk about one of those theories. Hey, Brittany. Hey, Elsa. Okay, so tell us what seems to be making so many people these days feel so lonely, especially if this is something that seems to be deepening over the years.
Well, that is an existential question I cannot answer, but I can tell you that when you look into research more into the general public, a lot of people are blaming technology, things like social media and being on phones
connecting me with my neighbor if a social media algorithm is deciding between showing me her post about her garden or the post of some influencer in LA. It's gonna choose that influencer over my friend. So all of a sudden, these social media platforms that are supposedly about human connection end up prioritizing kind of the opposite of that.
I mean, yeah, that totally makes sense. These apps, they end up further isolating people because they keep these people away from actual personal human-to-human interaction, I imagine, yeah?
Exactly. And there's another layer to this. And this one really surprised me. There's an inherent class divide within how Americans experience loneliness that pops up. Here's more from my conversation with Sam Russell.
When you look at the groups who are most socially isolated, most disconnected, it's consistently people without college degrees. And essentially what's happened is we've created college as this supercharger of our relational lives. The returns on that degree socially have gotten even more extreme because the civic infrastructure of our communities has declined so much. So in the past, you're a member of a church or a temple or a mosque, and that provides a structure. If you don't have a college degree, you're more likely to be working in a retail industry or a service industry where you have a precarious workplace. You don't know what your schedule is next week. How are you going to plan to spend time with people? It's not that anyone without a degree is worse at building relationships, but it's so much more work is put on you yourself.
So, Elsa, loneliness, there is an app for that, but if you really want to address loneliness, you're going to have to look at how class divides actually perpetuate that loneliness.
Brittany Luce is host of It's Been a Minute from NPR. You can listen to It's Been a Minute wherever you get your podcasts.
Ramadan can be a lonely experience for young Muslims in non-Muslim homes. The Muslim Foster Care Association in Michigan recently held an iftar, an evening meal to break the fast, to bring some of those young people together. For member station WDET, Nargis Rahman reports from Dearborn Heights.
This call to prayer ends the day's fast. Now it's time to feast. Organizers and volunteers of the Muslim Foster Care Association finished putting the final touches to the buffet-style iftar, a row of savory Thai food, pastry treats like kanafe, and enormous macadamia cookies. Salif Mahmoud moved to the U.S. from Ghana 3 years ago. He lives in independent housing. He says in previous years, he's had a hard time observing Ramadan in non-Muslim foster homes.
So this house I was living with this lady, like she doesn't know nothing about Islamic, nothing. She doesn't know nothing about Ramadan. Even I used to fuss and be like, oh, you need to drink water, you need to stop fasting.
Mahmoud had to practice his religious obligations on his own, without family, halal food, or access to a mosque. During this Ramadan, a Muslim family has taken him in. Shireen Abunada, Director of Operations at Muslim Foster Care Association, has been working with the group for 6 years. There are around 250 known Muslim foster youth and less than a dozen Muslim foster families in Michigan. Now, Abunada says, there's been an influx of even more Muslim youth to the state's foster care system. Before President Donald Trump took office in January, groups who resettle refugees worked to bring refugees to the United States as soon as possible.
They expedited a lot of travel of refugee Muslim foster youth from the West African countries. So we've had an influx of about 50 to 70 youth that have just recently arrived in the past couple months.
Abunada says with the changing immigration policies under the Trump administration, unaccompanied refugees who are children feel especially vulnerable right now.
It'll be a ripple effect, and we hope it doesn't affect the kids. We're all doing the best we can to protect the kids, but at the end of the day, it'll definitely be an effect.
But for now, the association wants to give youth a place to gather with the community away from home and a space to break fast together. For NPR News, I'm Nargis Rahman in Dearborn Heights.
All Things Considered from NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Progressive Insurance, where drivers can compare direct rates using Progressive's rate comparison tool. Customers can see options and rates side by side. More at progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE. From Melville Charitable Trust, committed to ensuring all people have a safe, stable, and affordable home that allows them to thrive. Information about ways to prevent and solve homelessness is at melvilletrust.org. From Fisher Investments, as a fiduciary, Fisher Investments is obligated to act in their client's best interest. Learn more at fisherinvestments.com. Investing in securities involves the risk of loss. And from listeners like you, who donate to this NPR station.
Minute before 6 on the evening before Friday, here on your NPR station, News 88.7. Back out to the Gulf Freeway. All main lanes have reopened on the southbound side of 45 at El Dorado. However, the exit to El Dorado is still taken up with car fire cleanup. It's going to be about 20 minutes or so from Edgebrook. And northbound 288, that's still in recovery mode from right around the South Belt for an earlier car fire. We have an hour or so left in that red flag fire warning and an hour and a half until sunset. It'll be clear overnight with a low around 47. Winds will die down quite a bit. They'll call them light variable, whatever that means. Light variable, I guess. Sunrise at 7:24, sunny and breezy with high near 73, and quite breezy again on Saturday and a high near 81. Right now it's 70 here at the UH campus on your NPR station, KUHF Houston, News 88.7. The service of the University of Houston. Mid 6 o'clock.
So the Department of Education will be much smaller than it is today.
A long-expected executive action from President Trump, the dismantling of the U.S. Department of Education.
Today is Thursday, March 20th, and this is All Things Considered from NPR News. And I'm Mary Louise Kelly. This hour we hear from a federal prosecutor who just resigned from the Justice Department.
He told NPR it just wasn't the Department of Justice he wanted to associate with any longer.
How high do you let the water rise before you get in the boat? If it was just me, the calculus would have been different, but I have to think of my family.
Also, as sports betting on March Madness ramps up, what are the risks of gambling addiction?
The urges come out of nowhere, and the distance between you and the action is so minimal.
Those stories after this news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear. A federal judge has said the government provided a, quote, woefully insufficient response to his prior orders in a case over the Alien Enemies Act. NPR's Medical Steel reports Judge James Boasberg has been asking for additional details about weekend flights and reported hundreds of lead veils went gang members to El Salvador.
Boasberg had issued an emergency order to temporarily block President Trump's use of the wartime authority known as the Alien Enemies Act to quickly deport people, but some planes carrying hundreds of people still flew to El Salvador. Boasberg is seeking details about the government's compliance with his order. In a filing, a regional immigration and customs official said that cabinet secretaries are considering whether to refuse to provide evidence in the court case on grounds that it's information that could harm national security or foreign relations. Boasberg ordered the government to explain by 10 a.m. on Friday any discussions regarding this matter, known as invoking the privilege of state secrets, and to decide whether to invoke such privilege by March 25th. Mena Bustillo, NPR News.
The Veterans Affairs Home Loan Program has rescued 15,000 vets from foreclosure. NPR's Will Lawrence explains the program's future is uncertain.
During the pandemic, federally backed mortgage programs, including VA, gave homeowners a pause on payments. Except the VA then abruptly ended a key part of the program, leaving tens of thousands of veterans facing foreclosure. Now there's a rescue program for them, which VA says has helped 15,000 veterans so far. But at a recent House hearing, Republicans presented bills to scrap the program and replace it, arguing it leaves taxpayers on the hook for troubled loans. VA officials had no comment on those bills. VA officials also had no answer for how many staff have been cut from the home loan office in the ongoing force reductions made by the Doge team led by Elon Musk. The White House says it will cut about 80,000 VA jobs. Will Lawrence, NPR News.
With March Madness in full swing, so too is sports gambling. Americans expected to wager $3 billion this year in the NCAA tournament. Experts warn there's not enough understanding of the dangers of addiction and gambling. Here's Katie Riddle.
The entire industry of gambling has undergone a tectonic shift in recent years, as gambling is now legal in 38 states. More people are struggling with problem gambling. Experts warn it triggers the same pathways in the brain as substances can. Ben Yu struggled for years with problem gambling.
I wanted to chase it no matter what, even if it meant my death, even if it meant like everybody hated me. But I also was really good at lying and hiding it.
Yu is in recovery now. He says some parts of his life are damaged permanently. Katie Riddle, NPR News.
Stocks edged modestly lower on Wall Street today. The Dow was down 11 points. Nasdaq fell 59 points. This is NPR.
Live from News 88.7 in Houston, I'm Gail DeLore. We're now learning a home is burned in a wind-driven wildfire in San Jacinto County. That fire is now about 45% contained, but it made its way into the Sam Houston National Forest. It's now believed the fire was sparked by a controlled burn on private property. A man who was arrested at the Colony Ridge development northeast of Houston last month can now get out on bond. News 88.7's Patricia Ortiz says that's after attorneys were able to prove he wasn't a flight risk.
Immigration and Customs Enforcement says Eric Bayani is a 51-year-old man from Mexico who was arrested during an I-9 audit of his tire shop. I-9 forms are used to determine the identity and work eligibility of people businesses hire. Bayan was arrested on the same day Texas Governor Greg Abbott announced an immigration enforcement operation in Colony Ridge. Sylvia Mintz is the attorney who represented Bayan in his bond hearing. She says she plans to continue to fight Bayan's removal process.
Immigration case doesn't end. We have to continue fighting in the movement. We will have more court hearings beyond the incident because it's not going to be safe.
Mintz says they still have to prove Bayan has legal options to avoid deportation. I'm Patricia Ortiz, News 88.7.
A bill requiring the Ten Commandments be displayed in every public school classroom in the state now heads to the House. That's after the state Senate approved it last night. Democratic Senator Nathan Johnson read into the record a letter from more than 160 religious leaders of different faiths who say they're against the bill. The University of Houston will now go on to play Gonzaga in the second round of the NCAA tournament. Each advanced after defeating Southern Illinois Edwardsville 78-40. Next game is Saturday in Wichita. A red flag warning remains in effect until 7 tonight. Clear skies this evening, overnight low around 47. Sunny tomorrow, high near 73 tomorrow night near 57. I'm Gail DeLore, News 88.7.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people, and the Skoll Foundation, dedicated to powering social innovators to transform the world. Learn more at skoll.org.
On a Thursday, it's All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Mary Louise Kelly in Washington.
And I'm Elsa Chang in Culver City, California. President Trump has signed a long-anticipated executive action today. It officially calls for the dismantling of the U.S. Department of Education.
We want to return our students to the states where just some of the governors here are so happy about this. They want education to come back to them, to come back to the states, and they're going to do a phenomenal job.
This comes more than a week after sweeping layoffs shrank the department by nearly half. For more on what this action means, we're joined now by NPR's Corey Turner.
Hey, Elsa.
Okay, so what specifically is in this executive action?
Well, at this event, President Trump said he is directing the Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, to take the necessary steps to try to close the department. There is nothing in this word that will completely or immediately close the department. It is largely committing to paper what Trump has been saying for years and already started last week when the department, as you just said, was cut nearly in half. It was interesting, though, at today's event. Trump rightly, I think, decried students' stagnant math and reading scores, but you could hear in that tape, the intro, Elsa, he talked about how great education would be once he returns control of schools back to states. And the problem with that is that states and local districts are already firmly things it says explicitly is the responsibility for education belongs to states and local schools. What the department does is protect students' civil rights, and it provides some money to help schools educate the nation's most vulnerable students, including those living in poverty and students with disabilities. Federal funding streams, by the way, that President Trump said today he would preserve even as he cuts the department itself.
Well, Corey, we know that only Congress has the power to close the education department, right? And between this executive action and those staff cuts that we're talking about, how much of any of this is actually legal?
I mean, I think that's the question the courts now have to answer, Elsa. At what point are staff cuts so deep that they hinder programs that are protected by law, created by Congress? So I'm going to give you one example, right? The department is responsible for managing the massive federal student loan program, right? And the White House says, in spite of all these cuts, student loans will not be touched. But NPR obtained notes from an emergency meeting last week of the department's top student loan officials right after these cuts were announced. And their worry in this meeting was palpable. Multiple officials in that meeting said they had not been consulted about the cuts ahead of time. They had lost people they considered vital. One official even said they were worried these cuts had made the agency vulnerable to hackers trying to steal borrower data. So I think it is worth being skeptical when the Trump administration says it won't touch a certain program, because these programs don't exist without the people to.
Exactly. And that's just student loans. What about K through 12 schools and families? Like, what could all of this mean for them?
I mean, I think it depends on how far these cuts go. You know, that funding for vulnerable students I mentioned earlier, it requires staff to manage and distribute. More broadly, though, Elsa, I want to end on this note. The White House is making very clear this is part of an effort to expand school choice across the country, including private school choice. President Trump has been a big champion of creating a federal tax credit to help families pay for private school tuition. Democrats would certainly oppose a move like that. I think overall we're seeing the Trump administration really try to shake the foundation of the nation's public education system right now.
That is NPR's Corey Turner. Thank you, Corey.
Over the past couple of months, 3 separate Middle East conflicts calmed down. Not peace exactly, but the daily shooting had largely stopped in Gaza, also Yemen, and in Syria. Yet in recent days, all 3 have returned with a vengeance. To break this down, I want to bring in NPR's Greg Myrie, who was recently in the region. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Mary Louise.
Take this one piece at a time. Start with Gaza, the renewed Israeli offensive against Hamas. Are we back now to all-out full-scale war?
Well, the Israeli air and ground campaign looks very similar to Israel's military operations before the ceasefire. Hamas is severely weakened, but today they were able to fire rockets at Tel Aviv for the first time in months. Now, I was in Israel when the ceasefire took effect in January, and there was this overwhelming relief on both sides. Israelis and Palestinians welcomed the halt to the fighting. Both sides were thrilled to see the release of their hostages, prisoners, and detainees. But even then, these dark clouds were on the horizon. The initial truce didn't address the very tough issues of Israeli forces fully withdrawing from Gaza or Hamas giving up control of Gaza. Neither side has budged, and now we're seeing this intense Israeli campaign. Hundreds of Palestinians dead, Palestinian civilians uprooted yet again. Even if a ceasefire is restored, like we had for the past 2 months, these larger issues remain.
Okay, let me turn you next to Yemen, where the U.S. Navy is waging daily airstrikes against the Houthis. What is the U.S. goal?
Well, President Trump wants to completely destroy the Houthis. He said on Truth Social, quote, "Tremendous damage has been inflicted upon the Houthi barbarians, and watch how it will get progressively worse. It's not even a fair fight and never will be. They will be completely annihilated." Now, the Houthis are, of course, outgunned, but they're also very resilient, and it's far from clear whether airstrikes alone will stop Houthi attacks on ships in the Red Sea. Here's retired U.S. Army General Joe Votel, who previously commanded U.S. forces in the Middle East.
The definition of success is about stopping attacks on shipping and ships that go through the Red Sea. I think that has to stop. The flow of commerce and navigation needs to return to its pre-October 23 levels.
General Votel's referring there, October 2023. 2023, meaning the start of the war in Gaza, right?
Right, that's right. And Infotel is noting this clear link between the Gaza war and Yemen. The Houthis say they're attacking in solidarity with the Palestinians, and the Houthis did halt these attacks when the Gaza ceasefire took effect two months ago. But as that truce unraveled, tensions rose in Yemen as well, and the U.S. launched this open-ended bombing campaign last weekend.
Okay, to conflict number 3 on our radar, Syria. Back in December, when rebels seized power, it looked, there were hopes that that long civil war was over. Why a resurgence in fighting there now?
Well, short answer, the groups that were defeated back in December have not completely gone silent. A major battle erupted a week or so ago between forces that are part of the new government and remnants loyal to the old regime of ousted dictator Bashar al-Assad. Hundreds of people were killed, many civilians along Syria's Mediterranean coast. There's sporadic fighting elsewhere, and it's raising questions about whether the new government, led by the Islamist group HTS, can establish full control. Right now, it's hard to tell if these are isolated spasms of violence or signs of the civil war reigniting.
The thing is, President Trump insists he does not want to be involved in endless Middle East wars. Why is he being so active in the region?
Well, the best we can tell, he seems to believe he can wrap some of these conflicts up quickly and then move on. But they all have very long history, and there's really no solid reason to believe they can be resolved in the near term. And as a quick reminder, President Obama wanted to shrink the U.S. role in the region, as did President Trump in his first term, as did President Biden. But for recent U.S. presidents, the Middle East is just like the Hotel California. They may want to check out, but they can't seem to ever leave.
Wisdom from the Eagles and NPR's Greg Myrie. Thank you.
Sure thing, Mary Louise.
Video games are big business, but some of the most thought-provoking and even popular video games are made by small teams comprised of just a handful of developers. There's no way to know what the next big hit will be, but video game fans may have gotten a hint last night in San Francisco. NPR's Vincent Acavino has more.
And the winner is Consume Me.
The $10,000 grand prize at the Independent Games Festival Awards went to a video game called Consume Me. It's a darkly funny coming-of-age story about being a girl in high school.
Did you feel fat, stupid, and ugly in high school? Because I did, and Consume Me is the video game about that.
Jenny Jousha was the co-director on the project. She and artist J.N. Lee say the game's humor is the key to telling this serious story in an approachable way.
I don't know, I feel like these two are super funny, they're like super witty. She had to get on stage and make a joke.
No one laughed. No one laughed when I asked if anyone wanted to buy this for $10 million.
I think some people laughed.
Okay.
Humor was a shared theme among several of the night's winners. The audience award went to a game called Where Clean.
Ain't Kyle. He's the best darn janitor in Howland Heights. But Kyle has a secret.
Mason Sauerwald, creative director on the project, says the game started with a ridiculous premise. What if a janitor was also a werewolf?
So we basically took that stupid, silly concept and rolled with the cute, the gore, the comedy that came from it.
Other winners included Despelote, a game about playing soccer in Ecuador's capital city, and Slotbeast, a game that depicts a disturbing factory production. The thing that these games all have in common is that their staff is small. Game developer tools are becoming cheaper and easier to use. The result is smaller teams making more ambitious games. In 2018, just over 8,000 indie games were released. In 2024, that number skyrocketed to over 16,000. And revenue for indie games on Steam, the popular video game marketplace, has nearly doubled in that same time, according to analysis firm Video Game Insights. Just after the IGF Awards games were closed, the Game Developers' Choice Awards began. The awards featured games from major companies like Square Enix and Sony, but even here, at the night's big event, the grand prize winner was
Balatro,
an indie game developed almost entirely by just one person. Vincent Acamino, NPR News, at the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco.
And in Houston at 6:18 on All Things Considered here on your NPR station, News 87. 70 Fahrenheit, 21 Celsius right down here at the UH campus. Dave Pittman back out to the Gulf Freeway, southbound 45. We have some lanes blocked momentarily. They've been working on this car fire on the ramp to El Dorado for about an hour and a half. And so you'll find some intermittent lane blockage, and it's about a 20-minute drive from here.
What can organizations do to see stronger financial returns, improved employee performance, and build pathways to senior leadership? Invest in middle management.
Welcome to Bauer Business Focus. I am Dr. Vanessa Patrick, Associate Dean for Research at the C.D. Bauer College of Business at the University of Houston.
I'm Dr. Cheryl Baldwin, Associate Dean of Bauer's Executive Education. Middle managers play a vital role as intermediaries within a company, ensuring effective communication between executives and employees. Investing in the development of middle managers can provide considerable advantages for an organization. A Harvard study found that 57% of professionals regard the development of middle management as a priority. Executive education programs provide a way for mid-level managers to improve their skill set and climb the corporate ladder.
This has been Bauer Business Focus from the Bauer College of Business, sponsored by Texas Mutual Insurance Company. More episodes at houstonpublicmedia.org/Bauer.
Support comes from the Houston Symphony, kicking off its Fairy Tales Festival with Prokofiev's Cinderella. Plus, Simona Lamsma performs Korngold's Violin Concerto, March 14th through 16th at Jones Hall. Tickets at houstonsymphony.org. Support comes from Holocaust Museum Houston, featuring life and death on the border, 1910 to 1920, examining the conflict in Texas that would spur the Mexican-American Civil Rights Movement. Now through May 25th. Details at hmh.org.
It'll be clear overnight, low around 47, sunny and breezy tomorrow, and a high of 73 at 6:20.
Support for NPR comes from the station and from Bank of America. From local shops to global enterprises, Bank of America is committed to helping businesses of all sizes make every move matter. Learn more at bankofamerica.com/banking for business. From Indeed, committed to giving job listings increased visibility with relevant candidates through its sponsored jobs feature. Learn more at Indeed.com/NPR. And from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation at macfound.org.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Elsa Chang. Federal workers now face tough decisions that they have to make pretty quickly. Even if they're not fired, will they stay or will they go? At the Department of Justice, some longtime federal prosecutors say they are scared for the future under President Trump. And for the last several weeks, one prosecutor spoke to NPR about his own decision. Here is NPR's Tom Dreisbach.
I first talked to Sean Murphy more than a month ago. He was driving and anxious.
I mean, I've spent my career prosecuting violent criminals, transnational organized crime. Never have I felt less safe than with these defendants.
He's talking about the January 6th defendants, people charged for their role in the attack on the Capitol, which injured around 140 police officers. Murphy prosecuted dozens of those cases. He's been a prosecutor for about a decade. And on his first day in office, President Trump gave clemency to all of the rioters, even the most violent. And some were talking about revenge.
I mean, there are some posts on social media saying that prosecutors need to fry, that prosecutors need to get the rope, comments naming prosecutors directly, saying now it's your turn.
Trump calls the rioters patriots and hostages, so Murphy did not feel like the Justice Department had his back anymore. The administration was firing and demoting a lot of federal prosecutors who worked on January 6th cases. By the time we talked, Murphy had finished his January 6th work and was back prosecuting cases at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Puerto Rico. He loved his job, but could he keep it?
I seek to do justice where I can and without favor or fear of retribution. Well, I guess I'm going to emphasize that last part now, without fear of retribution.
Murphy kept wondering, am I next?
You know, in the words of The Princess Bride, I feel a bit like what the Dread Pirate Roberts says. Good night, good work, sleep tight, I'll likely kill you in the morning.
At the same time, he said he was asking himself another question. Do I even want to stay? Several federal prosecutors have already resigned, saying they could not ethically follow the administration's orders, like the order to New York Mayor Eric Adams. Murphy told me that question was weighing on him too.
I'm sure there's a line that I won't cross if asked, and I just hope I recognize it when it's there before me.
What is that line, do you think?
I don't know.
Murphy has 3 kids, all in school. He needed a job, so he stayed. But over the next several weeks, things kept piling up that worried him.
The interim U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia repeatedly referred to his office and himself as the president's lawyers, and that we are not.
And then there's one unexpected thing that got under Sean Murphy's skin. Not because he thought it really mattered, but because it did not. An official memo about the policy on straws.
It was just so crazy to me that the Attorney General of the United States would be writing a memo about the dangers of paper straws.
Had you ever received any memo like this from a prior Attorney General?
No. I mean, 1,000 times, no.
Murphy told me that his favorite part about being a prosecutor is that your job is supposed to be about justice and following the facts. He worked for the first Trump administration, but said this time feels different.
To maintain credibility, there has to be some separation between the president and the Department of Justice, some measure of independence, and that's nearly gone.
And he realized that all those changes at the department had kind of made his decision for him.
And it just was not a Department of Justice that I any longer wanted to associate with.
Every day felt more tenuous. His coworkers were getting demoted, reassigned, and a job opportunity came up.
It became for me the question of how high do you let the water rise before you get in the boat. And if it was just me, the calculus would have been different, but I had to think of my family, and I made a choice.
Last Friday, Sean Murphy resigned from the Department of Justice. By the following Monday, he was already working at a private practice. On his way out, he wrote a resignation letter. He made fun of the order about the straws. He praised the work of the January 6th prosecution team. And he ended with something between a plea and a warning to his now former co-workers. Quote, "You serve no man." Tom Dreisbach, NPR News. And in response to this story, the Department of Justice said in a statement that they are ensuring, quote, "one tier of justice for all Americans and ending what they call the weaponization of law enforcement."
The defending NBA champions, the Boston Celtics, are set to be sold for $6.1 million. The would-be buyers, an investor group led by venture capitalist and reported diehard fan William Chisholm. The price tag is the highest sales price for any U.S. sports franchise. We're joined by Esteban Bustillos of GBH in Boston. Hi there.
Hi, Mary Louise.
Were we expecting the sale?
Yeah, so the current majority owners, the Grosbeck family, they had announced their intention to sell the team last year. Now, 4 prospective buyers had recently been reported on, including Chisholm, but now it's official, and all that really remains is the approval from the NBA Board of Governors. And current co-owner Rick Grosbeck is slated to remain team governor and oversee operations through the 2027-28 NBA season.
Circle back to that price tag, $6.1 billion. Yeah. How did we get quite there?
Right, so obviously it's a lot of money. Now, Andrew Zimbalist, an economist at Smith College, points out that the Celtics are maybe the premier NBA franchise. And while the NBA has stayed steady with 30 teams since 2004, outside factors like population and incomes in the U.S. have grown, which has helped to make franchises more valuable.
So all these sources of revenue and demand for top-level professional basketball players, all those sources have grown at the same time that the supply of franchises has stayed steady.
Now, we said the last remaining item is this all has to be approved by the NBA. Is that likely?
Yeah, it seems at least fairly likely. Victor Matheson, an economist at the College of the Holy Cross, says the only concern is if the source of the finances is not nearly as stable as it appears, but otherwise he imagines this will be smooth sailing for the new guys.
So the NBA will do some due diligence about whether, this ownership group really does have the financial capacity to run a Celtics team in the way the NBA wants a Celtics team to run.
Well, That prompts a last question, Esteban. Are the new owners expected to bring new ideas? Any changes you're watching for in the organization?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a gradual transition now. The C's, obviously, they have a championship caliber franchise. The real question is, will the new ownership be willing to continue to spend money on a roster that is expected to be the most expensive in NBA history by next season?
That is Esteban Bustillos of GBH News in Boston. Thanks for your reporting.
Thanks, Mary Louise.
It's coming up on 6:29, and you've been listening to All Things Considered on your NPR station, News 88.7 Marketplace as well.
Hello, Houston. It's Frank Billings. Ernie Manous here.
And I'm Celeste Diaz-Sherman. Your new favorite crew is coming together for a brand new show.
This show's for you. We want to know what you have to say. Call in or text us, whether it's about lifestyle, current events, politics, or pop culture.
We're here to be your connection to the city.
This is Hello, Houston.
Weekdays at 11 a.m. starting March 31st on Houston Public Media News 88.7 and streaming online.
Support comes from Signify Business Cash by Wells Fargo. With this business credit card, cardholders can earn rewards on business purchases with no caps or categories to track. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/signify. Terms apply. Donations come in many forms: a monthly membership, a one-time gift, and that extra vehicle you no longer need. We take any kind of vehicle in any condition. Learn more at houstonpublicmedia.org/cars. And thank you.
And we're still dealing with that vehicle fire cleanup southbound 45 Gulf Freeway, blocking the exit to El Dorado. 70 degrees right now here at the UH campus at 6:30.
Marketplace is supported by Progressive Insurance. The Name Your Price tool provides a range of coverage options. Progressive.com. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Just because you never can have enough tariff news, that's what's on the show today. Okay, that's not true. You can have enough tariff news. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Certified Financial Planner Professionals. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their client's best interest. Learn more about CFP professionals at letsmakeaplan.org. And by Viking, dedicated to bringing travelers to the heart of each destination with small ship, river, ocean, and expedition voyages, offering cultural enrichment and immersive experiences. Discover more at Viking.com. And by Solidyne. Today's AI ambitions require a different approach to storage. Solidyne offers solid-state storage solutions optimized for AI with higher capacities, greater speed, and energy efficiency. StorageForAI.com.
In Los Angeles, I'm Con Rizdal. It is Thursday today. This one is the 20th of March. Good as it always is to have you along. President Trump's tariffs are affecting a lot of things in this economy, and we have talked about those things a lot the past couple of weeks. But what happens in the American economy most definitely does not stay in the American economy. There are retaliatory tariffs, either already in place or coming soon. There are the hits to global growth that are almost certainly coming. And there are what might be termed unintended, although perhaps unthought about works as well, consequences. The president says taxing imports, because again, tariffs are taxes on American consumers. The president says that will boost domestic production. American consumers will then buy more American-made goods. American manufacturers will then sell more to consumers overseas, which, fine, until one remembers what tariffs are going to do to the value of the dollar. Marketplace's Justin Hogan. Let's go.
Here's the issue. If you want to buy goods from another country and import them, you typically have to buy them in that foreign country's currency.
So if we want to buy cheese from the Netherlands, we need some euros to buy the cheese with because that's what they sell it in.
Ed Gresser, Progressive Policy Institute, says if the U.S. government slaps a tariff on that cheese, it becomes more expensive. Consumers buy less of it. Grocery stores stock less, which means
the demand for euros has gone down relative to the dollar.
And lower demand for euros pushes down the currency's value relative to others.
That would then lead to a stronger dollar.
Catherine Dominguez is an economics professor at the University of Michigan. So far this year, the dollar's value has been ticking down. Dominguez says that's in large part because importers have been trying to bring in extra goods ahead of the president's tariffs.
So we've actually been buying more imports, therefore needing more foreign currency, therefore driving up the value of foreign currency relative to the dollar.
But once new tariffs start taking a bite out of imports, the dollar's value is likely to strengthen again. And that will make American exports more expensive for foreign buyers.
Meaning that now U.S. goods denominated in dollars would be less competitive relative to goods denominated in other currencies.
That's when American companies are likely to turn their attention to selling more goods to domestic consumers, maybe even open up new factories and create new jobs. But there's a big trade-off to keep in mind, says Oleg Itzhoki, an economics professor at Harvard.
Some jobs will be lost because it will be unprofitable to export because of the stronger value of the dollar.
Meanwhile, other countries that follow the U.S.'s lead and slap tariffs on American goods will end up turning inwards too.
The Canadian factories will turn to service the Canadian consumers instead of exporting to the United States. But U.S. will be able to export less goods all around the world because of the stronger dollar.
Itzhoki says what we're talking about here is a less efficient global economy.
Because we started an equilibrium when it was efficient to produce in Canada for the American market. We lose efficiency as a result. And that's the tax that the consumers are paying then.
The tax that causes prices to rise and economic growth to stall. I'm Justin Howe for Marketplace.
Wall Street on this Thursday, not a winner. Not bad, but not a winner. We'll have the details when we do the number.
With financial markets down sharply in recent weeks, some of that ready cash may start to dry up. I'm Mitchell Hartman for Marketplace.
really, but were you productive today? Did you get all your work done in the expected amount of time, or ideally less time? I ask because worker productivity, rising worker productivity to be clear, is one of those key metrics that economists watch pretty closely. At its most basic, the formula is widgets produced per hour worked. And the more worker productivity there is, the more widgets that get made in the same amount of time. That's what leads to economic growth and, not coincidentally, rising wages. Productivity in the United States has been on the upswing, up 2.7% last year, well above average. And historically, most of the big jumps in living standards, which is a proxy for productivity, have been driven by new technologies, the introduction of the steam engine, widespread electrification, computers too, of course. And a lot of economists are hoping that the boost in productivity we're seeing right now might be the start of another long surge driven by AI. Marketplace's Megan McCarty-Carino took a look at that.
Two economists made a friendly bet a few years ago about how much productivity will grow this decade. Eric Brynjolfsson and Robert Gordon registered the wager on the prediction website Long Bets. The stakes are $400.
But I think it's more of a reputational bet.
That's Brynjolfsson. He's a professor at Stanford where he directs the Digital Economy Lab, and he's bullish on productivity. His own research on customer service agents who started using an AI large language model showed their productivity improved as much as 34%. And other recent studies on software development, business consulting, writing, and sales showed similar results.
These are the biggest gains I've ever seen. I mean, to see like double-digit gains just within a few months is almost unheard of.
In the other corner, Robert Gordon, professor at Northwestern and author of The Rise and Fall of American Growth.
It's not going to be a revolution. It's not going to blow out human nature. I think that's all greatly overblown.
He believes AI will raise productivity, but points to the last 20 years or so of modest gains, despite high-tech innovations ranging from smartphones to the app economy.
Those things really are minor compared to the difference it made to have trucks instead of horses. To have airplanes instead of cranes.
For now, Brynjolfsson has pulled to the lead, though it's not clear yet if the bump in productivity we're seeing is evidence of the start of a durable AI boom. Joseph Briggs is a senior economist for Goldman Sachs Global Investment Research.
If we look at an economy-wide basis, the impacts still look quite negligible.
Goldman Sachs has forecast that once generative AI has been widely adopted, it could raise productivity in the U.S. by 15% over 10 years. But Briggs thinks it will take a couple of years for AI to show up in productivity data.
You need to restructure workflows, you have to have workers comfortable using it, and all of these things take time.
Briggs says companies are making big investments in the technology, especially in industries like law. Annie Dadish is the Chief Innovation Officer for Silicon Valley law firm Wilson Sonsini, which works with a lot of tech startups. The firm developed an AI tool to help review agreements for cloud services.
We negotiated them a lot, it would be high volume, but a standard form, and suddenly automation and AI start to make sense.
Wilson Sonsini uses AI, trained on its own best practices, to customize the agreements. Then a human lawyer reviews and finalizes them. The tech should eventually help the firm serve more clients faster, but it's not quite there yet.
Well, think about when you hire a new person, right? They're always going to kind of slow you down at first, but then they get trained up and then they can take over tasks.
Right now, the AI is still kind of green.
And so you're still monitoring it and supervising it like it's that new person, which will theoretically slow you down.
It's a pattern you often see when a powerful new technology diffuses through the economy, says Stanford's Eric Brynjolfsson. At first, it looks like nothing is happening until suddenly productivity takes off, what he calls a J-shaped curve.
With the steam engine, with electricity, with the internal combustion engine, when we measured that, it often took literally decades. It took about 30 years for electricity to really have its full payoff.
He expects AI to deliver productivity benefits much faster, since it doesn't require specialized hardware or skills to use. He's got until 2029 to win the bet. Whether a productivity boom from AI will be a win for most workers, that he's not so sure about. I'm Megan McCarty-Carino for Marketplace.
There was a time when Alaska produced more crude oil than any other state in the Union. That time, though, was 1988. And in the decades since, oil production in the 49th state has dropped by around 75%. But there is a report out this week from the Energy Information Administration that says Alaskan oil output's going to grow next year, the biggest production increase perhaps in decades. Daniel Ackerman has more on the rise and fall and maybe the rise again of Alaskan crude.
Oil production in Alaska first took off in the 1970s after a series of global energy price shocks. Jeff Kralowitz is with the market intelligence firm Argus Media. He says that growth was helped along by the construction of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline,
which was able to take all of this crude from the northern part of Alaska to the Port of Valdez in the southern part of the state and sell it.
Now, though, a lot of those northern oil fields are what they call in the business mature, says Charles Mason, an economist at the University of Wyoming.
So you get a certain amount of production early on, and then it tends to taper off. And the only way you arrest that is by having more wells drilled.
Mason says that's been happening less lately in Alaska, in part because of conservation measures, but also because the Arctic tundra isn't an easy place to do business, says Ellen R. Wald of the Atlantic Council.
If you're going to need to build pipelines, you can only transport those pipelines to where you need them to be during the winter because you have to use ice roads.
Cheaper fracking has helped some other states surpass Alaska's output. But 2 new oil developments in Alaska are expected to boost production. Not to anywhere near peak levels, says Wald.
But I do think that this is meaningful because they put in all of the investment and infrastructure,
which could make future expansion easier. Jeff Kralowitz of Argus Media says the changes could also be felt elsewhere in the domestic oil economy.
A lot of the new refineries or refinery modifications in California were designed to run Alaskan crude.
Because as California's own production of crude has fallen, refineries there are now more reliant on oil from the Arctic. I'm Daniel Ackerman for Marketplace.
Coming up.
A trend is, at its core, a structure for advertising and selling something.
If you thought trends move fast, meet micro trends. But first, let's do the numbers. Dow Industrial's down 11 points. We'll call that flat, 41,953. The NASDAQ off 59 points, about a third of 1%, 17,691. The S&P 500 down 12 points, about 0.2%, 56 and 62. Mitchell was talking about housing. Pulte Group, which operates in more than 45 markets around the country, rose 0.2%. MI Homes, which builds in the Midwest and South, gained about 0.5%. Today is the first day of spring, so some vernal stocks. 1-800-Flowers, ticker symbol FLWS, wilted 1 6/10% today. Sunoco traded as SUN, targeting 1 1/10% today. Bonds down, yield on the 10-year T-note 4.24%. You're listening to Marketplace.
The Numbers is supported by Odoo.com, your entire business on one platform. Marketplace is supported by Lisa. Lisa believes that a better night's sleep should be available to everyone. Since 2015, Lisa has donated over 41,000 mattresses to shelters and those in need. Learn more at leesa.com. And by Raymond James, a firm focused on transforming lives, businesses, and communities through tailored wealth management, banking, and capital markets solutions. Disclosures at raymondjames.com. And by Pure Storage. In a world of fragmented systems, Pure Storage delivers a single, consistent, as-a-service platform for all data storage needs across on-premises, cloud, and hosted environments. More at purestorage.com.
Coming up on 648 on your NPR station, News 87.
Support comes from UT Health Houston,
home to Dr. Ramisha Papana and the Fetal Center team, who pioneered a prenatal patch to help babies with spina bifida walk earlier and better. More at uth.edu/manyfaces. Support comes from Carr, Riggs & Ingram, CPAs and Advisors, a top 25 nationally ranked full-service accounting and advisory firm offering tax, audit, accounting, consulting, and advisory services. Learn more at cricpa.com. Support comes from Broadway Bank's commercial banking team. Since 1941, committed to helping businesses with their financial needs and growth. More information available at broadway.bank/commercial. Member FDIC. Support comes from Cypress Creek Bass, presenting Canadian Brass on April 5th at 7:30 p.m. With 4 decades of experience, Canadian Brass has performed for audiences worldwide. Tickets at cypresscreekbass.org.
This is Marketplace. I'm Kai Risdom. All right, let's talk about inflation here for a second, in the academic sense, not the, oh man, egg prices are really high sense. Inflation is a broad-based increase in the price of goods and services throughout the economy over time. And as we told you yesterday, Chair Powell and the gang at the Fed are keeping a closer, we should say, eye on price levels, given the Trump tariffs that are already in place and the ones that are coming on the 2nd of April. But not all tariffs are created equal, and not all prices react the same way. Marketplace's Supreme Benishore has more on that.
MFA Incorporated is a farmer's cooperative based in Columbia, Missouri. It's owned by 40,000 ranchers and farmers. It sells a lot of fertilizer.
You know, the two biggest wild cards in our business are weather and the government.
Chris DeMoss is Senior Director of Plant Foods, and he says the least predictable one has always been the government. Potash fertilizer from Canada was going to get tariffs at the beginning of this month, but that was pushed back to April 2nd.
They're going to have an impact, there's no doubt, because 80% of what we use domestically comes from Canada.
But whatever that impact is, it's going to be delayed.
Because there were a lot of tons that were already in place for this spring. And so, you know, we'll probably have a better understanding of what all this means as we get into the summer period and go into the fall.
For other products, the delay is going to be much shorter. 20% tariffs on goods from China are going to start showing up on stickers in April, predicts Paul Sharif. He's head of Inflation Insights.
A lot of sort of furniture and household goods, things like, household appliances, furniture in particular is a big one, cookware, cutlery.
71% of our cookware and cutlery is imported from China. He says 45% of all footwear is. And the prices for these goods tend to get handed on to consumers. That's what happened with washing machines in 2018.
Tariffs went up 20%, prices went up 18%.
Anderson Economic Group analyzed the impact of the multiple layers of tariffs on cars over the next few months. Patrick Anderson is CEO.
The typical model produced by these manufacturers in North America would see a tariff cost increase of between $4,000 and $10,000.
His advice is buy that car now. Tomatoes from Canada and avocados from Mexico would see jumps pretty quickly in April. Other industries would not see much effect. Tariffs on oil, for example.
Canada would end up eating that because we have so much supply here.
Builders are nervous over construction materials. Elijah Oliveros Rosen is chief economist for emerging markets at S&P Global Ratings.
Steel and aluminum is one, and also some goods that are imported from Canada, such as lumber, are very important for housing, so it could have an outsized impact on inflation in the U.S.
But for now, all of this is still mostly a waiting game. In New York, I'm Supreme Benishore.
Life today moves fast, and it moves even faster if you're a young person trying to keep up with everything that goes by you on your social media feed. Not just trends, but micro trends. Things like, and I'm not making this up, coastal grandmother aesthetic and cottagecore. And while marketplace core has somehow not caught on yet, we called Kelly Holterman from the Style Desk at the New York Times, who wrote about this the other day. We're going to catch up. Kelly, welcome to the program. Good to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so trends I get in fashion, right? That's, been a thing forever. Micro trends, help me out.
Yeah, I hate to sort of come with the news of micro trends to you, which of course I'm slow to bring you. But
kind of like fashion trends. Perhaps it's a type of top or a print like cheetah print or even a little phrase like the mob wife aesthetic. But young people I talked to said they kind of rise and fall in a matter of months or even weeks.
The really interesting part about it, well, many parts about it, which were by turn interesting and horrifying, is that the younger kids, because these are like teenagers-ish, right, who are getting absorbed by all this, they know what's happening.
Totally. I spent the past few months talking to a lot of teenagers and people in their 20s about sort of what the trend ecosystem feels like to them right now. And over, they sort of gave me these kind of sobering monologues about how they know that their attention is very valuable. They understand that things like short-form video platforms like TikTok and fast fashion are kind of working together to speed up the trend cycle. And yet, at times, they can still feel caught up in it. And that can feel like a kind of confusing and trapped place to be.
Yeah, I bet. It is also, and they know this too, and being more environmentally aware, I suppose, than older generations, by and large, they feel bad about it. They know it's all about consumption, right? It's about buying things quickly and then turning around and buying more things.
Absolutely. Yeah, a trend is, at its core, a structure for advertising and selling something. It also can be a kind of more fun mode for self-expression, but I think the consumption aspect of trends is really heavy on the minds of a lot of young people right now. And you hear the word consumption, and it's kind of opposite, overconsumption, all the time when you get onto a platform like TikTok or Instagram.
Right, and while acknowledging that social media, has done a lot of good for a lot of people, this is reason 3,972. Social media can be bad.
Yeah, I heard from a lot of young people who sort of said that the proliferation of microtrends every year or couple of years, the way that might have been the case when I was in middle school, there can be several a week, and it ratchets up the feeling of insecurity or inadequacy, or if you don't have and can't afford often that item.
Right, so on the whole can't afford thing, I mean, fast fashion is cheap, and a lot of these things are not incredibly expensive, but they add up, and, it's not nothing.
Totally. I spoke to one young woman who talked about, I think in middle school, really begging her parents, saying she just started at a new school, she really wanted to fit in. And she mentioned the fact that she went to school and saw every girl at school had scrunchies, and then she went home and scrolled through TikTok and saw, another 20 videos of girls with scrunchies. And it, I think, ratcheted up that feeling for her of, oh, I'm not going to fit in without this. But as our conversation went on, she was one of several young people who expressed to me, I can feel that this is happening, and I am really trying to take a step back from it. And so many of these young people who, again, know what is going on are, I think, trying to take steps backwards from the trend cycle, although sometimes they are finding that difficult to do.
Well, so where do you land on this, right? Is this going to keep going, and will it get faster and faster, or is it eventually going to, die out because teenagers just go, I can't do this anymore?
It's funny, I've posed this question to so many experts, and I heard a lot of really conflicting things. On one hand, there are people who think that, TikTok is in jeopardy right now. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, one person I talked to who writes a daily trend newsletter said, I do think Gen Z is growing up and they're wising up to trends, but coming up right behind them is Gen Alpha, and she thinks that members of Gen Alpha will be even more clued into trends than the generations that came before.
I had such hope there, and then you got to Gen Alpha.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. It's all right. Kelly Holtman at the New York Times, the Style Desk. Kelly, thanks a lot. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Marketplace is supported by VantageScore, a leading inclusive and predictive credit score used by 8 out of 10 largest banks and over 3,400 bank and fintechs nationwide. VantageScore drives financial inclusion by leveraging innovation. Learn more at VantageScore.com. And by Schwab. Schwab knows that investors want control of their financial future. That's why when it comes to wealth management, Schwab is dedicated to giving investors more choices. More at Schwab.com. And by Odoo, dedicated to providing software designed to scale with businesses. Odoo's programs for manufacturing, accounting, and more aim to provide building blocks for creating a custom software suite. Odoo, what small businesses need.
This final note on the way out today, which, Klarna, which is a buy now, pay later service, has announced a new partnership no interest, by the way, or you put it off to a date that aligns with your payday. It is perhaps worth a note here that Klarna is set to go public on the New York Stock Exchange. Ticker symbol is going to be KLAR, should you be interested. Or in need of, buy now, pay later for your food. John Buckley, John Gordon, Noah Card, Diane Parker, Amanda Peacher, and Stephanie Seek are the Marketplace editing staff. Amir Bibawi is the managing editor. And I'm Kyle Rizdal. We will see you tomorrow, everybody. This is APM.
It's a minute before 7 on the evening before Friday here on your NPR station, News 87. One brand new wreck just popped up on the Houston Transtar board. It's on the South Loop, westbound direction of 610 and Fannin. They say 2 right lanes.
Support comes from HealthLink Advisors, preparing hospitals for cyber attacks and resulting downtime with ClinicalNet business continuity services designed to ensure continuous patient care and operations. Or at healthlinkadvisors.com.
The winds are dying down right now. We've got them in single digits and lower teens out of the northwest, so that red flag fire warning is being allowed to expire right at this very moment. We're about half an hour away from sunset. It'll be clear with low around 47, winds out of the east up to around 10 miles an hour. Tomorrow sunrise at 7:24, sunny and breezy throughout the day with high near 73. Right now at 70 here at the UH campus on your NPR station, KUHF Houston News 88.7, service of the University of Houston at 7 o'clock.
Were likely to be effective.
I'm Michael Barbaro. That's coming up on The Daily from the New York Times. The Daily is supported by BetterHelp, committed to supporting mental health through therapy. Clients are matched with one of 30,000 therapists and can communicate via video, chat, or phone at betterhelp.com/public. And by The Wall Street Journal, whose Take on the Week podcast breaks down the financial week ahead to help listeners navigate the markets. New episodes on Sundays.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear. President Trump has signed an executive order to begin dismantling the Department of Education. During his campaign, Trump promised to turn over at least some of the agency's responsibilities to the states, as well as push for support for private schools. First, Corey Turner reports.
The White House is making very clear this is part of an effort to expand school choice across the country, including private school choice. President Trump has been a big champion of creating a federal tax credit to help families pay for private school tuition. Democrats would certainly oppose a move like that. I think overall we're seeing the Trump administration really try to shake the foundation of the nation's public education system right now.
It's not clear whether Trump has the authority to actually dismantle the department. It would take an act of Congress to shutter it. The White House says the Education Department will entirely close right away, continuing to oversee things like federal student loans and Pell Grants. A federal judge in Maryland has blocked billionaire Elon Musk's team from accessing personal data at the Social Security Administration. The court also ruled members of his team dumped the Department of Government Efficiency after delete any personally identifiable information they've collected. Or NPR's Ashley Lopez.
In her ruling, Judge Ellen Lipton Hollander wrote that Musk's team has essentially been engaged in what she called a fishing expedition at the Social Security Administration. And this expedition, she wrote, has been based on little more than suspicion of fraud. The judge also noted that the agency gave members of Musk's team, quote, unbridled access to the personal and private data of millions of Americans. That includes Social Security numbers, medical records, and bank and credit card information. And while the court has now limited Doge's access to much of that information, it does say that the agency is still allowed to hand over data that adheres to federal privacy laws. Ashley Lopez, NPR News.
The Justice Department has charged 3 people involved in violent attacks on Tesla locations across the U.S., believing the acts as domestic terrorism. Attorney General Pam Bondi says defendants are facing prison sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years. Here's Windsor Johnston.
One of the suspects is charged with throwing Molotov cocktails at a Tesla dealership in Oregon while armed with an AR-15 rifle. Another person is facing charges for attempting to ignite Tesla vehicles at a location in Colorado. The Justice Department has charged a third person in South Carolina with vandalizing Tesla charging stations with messages against President Trump before setting them on fire. Authorities have linked the attacks at Tesla locations to anger over the seemingly arbitrary firings of tens of thousands of people overseen by Tesla's CEO, Elon Musk. Windsor Johnston, NPR News, Washington.
Stocks closed lower today. The Dow was down 11 points. The Nasdaq fell 59. This is it. In one respect, even years after the start of the coronavirus pandemic, work life still has not returned to normal. A survey by Gallup looking at the workplace 5 years after the start of the pandemic finds many workers, even with a return to normalcy, still feel disconnected from their organization's purpose and are not clear on how to meet workplace expectations. Less than half of U.S. employees participating in the survey say they strongly agreed they knew what was expected of them at work. Meanwhile, Finland again has been named the world's happiest country, making it the 8th time in a row. According to Nation, Terry Schultz reports European countries keep the top spots in the annual survey of well-being, while the U.S. has dropped precipitously.
The World Happiness Report tracks how people in more than 140 countries feel about their lives. This year, Finland, Denmark, Iceland, Sweden, and the Netherlands round out the top 5, with Costa Rica, Israel, and Mexico the only non-European countries in the top 10. The survey is done by Gallup and the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Gallup CEO John Clifton says data proves happiness is not based on wealth.
One of the greatest correlates to seeing what makes life great is whether or not you live in a society that has community and where people feel safe.
Afghanistan ranks last. The U.S. dropped one spot to its lowest ever position at 24. For NPR News, I'm Terry Schultz in Brussels.
According to a new study, certain blood tests for ovarian cancer can miss Black and Native American patients. The study published today in JAMA Network Open. Researchers looked at data for more than 200 women. Black and Native Americans were 23% less likely to have an elected level of blood testing compared with white patients. This is
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the estate of Jane Gross, whose bequest supports NPR's commitment to creating a more informed public by distributing programming that meets the highest standards of public service and journalism. This is NPR.
From the New York Times, I'm Michael Navarro. This is The Daily. Ago, at the urging of federal officials, much of the United States locked down to stop the spread of COVID, a decision that over time polarized the country and changed the relationship between many Americans and their government. Now, two prominent political scientists are making the case that there's no clear evidence that those lockdowns saved lives, and that it's time for a national reckoning about the decision-making that led to those lockdowns in the first place. Today, my conversation with Stephen Massino and Francis Lee about their new book, In COVID's Wake, and what they say will be required for a better outcome when the next pandemic strikes. It's Thursday, March 20th. So to start, I want to talk about why you undertook this project of examining the U.S. response to COVID in a really rigorous way.
So maybe I'll just say a couple of words about that to start with. I actually had started to work on a large project on several topics on which I thought progressives were not paying enough attention to arguments coming from the other side. And that included immigration, abortion, and then COVID as well. And as soon as I got deeply into it, it was clear that the COVID policy issues themselves, the COVID crisis itself, was large enough, and moreover, that people were not engaging in critical reflection and the sort of reckoning we've tried to do. So this is meant to be, in part, a book about policy choices, policy deliberation, and in many ways, policy mistakes, perhaps, that were made during COVID. But there's also a larger kind of institutional question in the background, a principal question in the background, which is how did the institutions function, which is supposed to be helping us to catch mistakes and correct our mistakes, to seek the truth on difficult matters. How did they function under COVID? And I mean, of course, journalism, science, and the academy more broadly. And so the biggest theme that runs through the book, I think, is that these, as we call them, truth-seeking institutions, did not function as well as they should have during COVID. That there was a premature policy consensus, there was an unwillingness to re-examine assumptions, and there was an intolerance of criticism and divergent points of view that emerged fairly quickly in the pandemic, and that hurt us, that hurt our policy responses, that hurt our ability to course correct over the course of the pandemic as we learned more and had greater reason to course correct.
This was, as was frequently said at the time, a whole of government, whole of society response. And it was undertaken without the normal deliberation that accompanies decision-making of that degree of consequence. And, I remember when the pandemic began that I had some doubts as to whether these measures were going to succeed. It was just a normal kind of skepticism about whether government policy would work, which is, sort of bedrock to political science. That is one of our main topics of inquiry, whether government policy works or whether it has unanticipated consequences. And I was so struck at the lack of skepticism over the course of the pandemic about these measures. It was obvious that a large share of the workforce...
Lack of skepticism from some.
Yes, right. In the quarters, that I travel in, among academics or mainstream media, that's where there seemed to be little questioning. It was almost seen as sort of wrong or immoral to raise questions about whether this was feasible for most of the population.
Yeah, I started working on this book in 2022 and frankly have been kind of shocked on almost a daily basis in researching the book at the things I'm coming across and discussing with Francis.
In your reconstruction of it, I found myself thinking, wow, I thought I knew the pandemic really well because I lived through it. But one of the things that surprised me in your research, in your book, was that heading into the pandemic, you found that there was not a consensus that these restrictions, these mandates around things like school closures, lockdowns, stay-at-home orders, quarantining, masking, that they were the right way to try to fight a respiratory viral pandemic. That instead there was some real uncertainty about whether that made sense or that it could work at a large scale as public policy, and actually that there were a lot of doubts that it never could.
Well, there were a number of pre-COVID pandemic planning documents anticipating a respiratory pandemic, such as COVID turned out to be. One of them was published just in the fall of 2019, shortly before the COVID pandemic broke out. That was by the World Health Organization. It surveyed a range of non-pharmaceutical interventions, social distancing measures, school closures, everything other than vaccines and drugs. The whole suite of measures from hand washing, mask wearing, personal hygiene, staying apart, closing schools, restricting businesses, restricting public gatherings, not letting people go to church and so on. So
the big things we associate with the government's response to it.
Absolutely. Things that are often lumped under the word lockdown. Obviously, getting a vaccine as soon as possible and administering it was something on which there was a consensus. But the controversial part of the policy was the non-pharmaceutical measures.
And what made them controversial, and just how controversial were they?
Well, they were quite controversial because one of the things that the plans emphasize is that they would be costly, that keeping children out of school would lead to learning losses and other detriments to health and well-being, including mental well-being, from children being isolated. for those who own businesses, who depend on that businesses for a livelihood. Economic loss can lead also to psychological loss and family conflicts and so on. Isolating human beings who are social creatures will have a whole series of knock-on effects that the pre-pandemic planning documents discuss. And these matters have been studied, and they found that there was a lack of good evidence, an absence of certainty around the effectiveness of these measures.
Effectiveness in terms of actually stopping, containing the spread of the virus.
Yes, especially reducing morbidity and mortality, that is to say, serious illness and death.
I'd just like to add on this 2019 World Health Organization study. The study was to examine intervention by intervention, which of them have evidence of effectiveness against a respiratory pandemic. And all of the measures were rated as having very poor evidence. So in other words, we don't know if these measures work. 4 of them, they recommended not to use under any circumstances. Those 4 measures were quarantine of exposed persons, border closure, entry and exit screening, and contact tracing. So there were no assurances that these measures would work, but we were assured that they would have costs.
Right, and prompted by you two and what you wrote, I went and looked at this study. What it says is that while there is, like you just said, low evidence, that it was plausible that these kinds of interventions could help mitigate the spread of the virus. What do you make of that word, plausible?
Well, they had been suggested. That's the reason why they are being studied. And of course, we know at some level that viruses transmit from person to person. So one can infer that separating people from one another, putting barriers between them ought to make a difference, or that there's a logic there. But the question is whether that could be scaled up to society or whether it would be sustainable over the course of the pandemic. There was no body of evidence around that. And so when it became the mantra of the pandemic that we should follow the science, there just wasn't a body of scientific work that undergirded the response, that directed us to conclude that these measures were likely to be effective.
You're citing this WHO study, but how widespread, how dominant would you say this skepticism of these kinds of interventions as effective, as worth the cost, as practical and scalable? How widely would you say that view was held before the pandemic?
Well, yeah, the World Health Organization was one study, but there was another one in 2019 by Johns Hopkins, which came to similarly skeptical conclusions about these various non-pharmaceutical interventions, school closures, mask wearing, and so on and so forth. Earlier, in 2011, the UK government did a pre-pandemic planning document and similarly argued that in times of modern transportation around the world, these non-pharmaceutical interventions could not be counted on to significantly slow the spread of a virus. And so I would say that was the dominant view. There were, of course, mathematical modelers were prominent in the George W. Bush administration. They were more optimistic, not based on huge amounts of data, but based on scientific modeling projections. They believed that these measures could work.
Go straight on.
By Amazon Business, dedicated to helping businesses save time on office tasks and empower leaders with business buying solutions that support teams to focus on growing the business. Learn about smart business buying at AmazonBusiness.com.
And by Seed. Seed's DS-01 is a 24-strain 2-in-1 prebiotic and probiotic engineered to survive digestion, support healthy regularity, and promote whole body health. Learn more at seed.com/public.
Get the story firsthand with The Daily from the New York Times, distributed by American Public Media.
This is News 88.7.
Days after a battle over how and whether to fund the government, a new fight breaks out among Democrats.
I think you caved. I don't think you showed the fight that this party needs right now.
No one wants to fight more than me. You gotta fight smart.
Also on the roundup, Republican efforts to impeach judges draws a rare rebuke from the Supreme Court Chief Justice, and a boardroom bust-up at Ben & Jerry's leaves many with a bad taste.
Tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock here on News 88.7.
Support Houston Public Media by donating a vehicle you no longer need. We'll take it in any condition. It's free to you, easy to do, and it could mean hundreds of dollars in support. Visit HoustonPublicMedia.org/cars to learn more. Thanks.
Support comes from St. Luke's Health and St. Luke's Foundation, supporting clinical excellence, compassionate care, and a healthier future for all. More at supportstlukes.org.
My conversation with Stephen Macedo and Francis Lee about their new book, In COVID's Wake, and what they say will be required for a better outcome when the next pandemic strikes.
So, how and why did the U.S. shift gears and end up recommending pretty much all of the things that you're saying everybody previously thought wasn't such a good idea?
One factor was the fact that China locked down, and the World Health Organization sent a team to China, and they issued a report after just spending a week there, and it was a fulsome endorsement of the Chinese approach. They said that China has shown the world the way to suppress a virus, never been done before, but it's been done by China, and they endorsed the strategy without qualification around the world.
Can I just pause you? Because China's response, as I recall, was pretty heavily criticized at the very beginning as harsh. How did it become so persuasive? Especially given that's a very unique system of government. Totally authoritarian, with a big surveillance apparatus, and a much more compliant citizenry than most of the world.
Well, you're expressing some skepticism about the extent to which we should regard the Chinese approach as a model, given the features of its system and their inconsistency with Western civil liberties, freedom of dissent, and so on. And that's a perfectly good question. None of that is evident in the World Health Organization report. They don't emphasize those sorts of things at all. They pay no attention to the fact that Chinese had authoritarian powers to require people to be bolted into their apartments in some cases.
Literally, right.
Yeah, and then Italy had the first national lockdown in the world.
A democracy, we should say, not a
democracy, right. And that, I think, had a demonstration effect. Another factor was the report that came out of Imperial College London, the optimistic modeling projections about non-pharmaceutical interventions. That's Neil M. Ferguson. His report projected something like 2 million deaths in the United States by August 2020.
Right, kind of the reporter around the world.
The reporter around the world, one of the most influential, it looks like, reports that was ever issued. And it was that Anthony Fauci and Deborah Birx carried into Donald Trump's office, leading to a news conference on March 16th that recommended school closures and other measures.
This afternoon, we're announcing new guidelines for every American to follow over the next 15 days as we combat the virus. Each and every one of us has a critical role to play. My administration is recommending that all Americans, including the young and healthy, work to engage in schooling from home when possible, avoid gathering in groups of more than 10 people, avoid discretionary travel, and avoid eating and drinking at bars, restaurants, and public food courts.
This, what we're mentioning now, the guidelines, when you look at them carefully, I believe if the people in the United States take them seriously, because they were based on some rather serious consideration back and forth, some may look at them and say they're going to be really inconvenient for people. Some will look and say, well, maybe we've gone a little bit too far. They were well thought out.
Turn right.
So take a look at the guidelines, read them carefully, and we hope that the people of the United States will take them very seriously, because they will fail if people don't adhere to them. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This morning, I signed an executive order directing nearly all of our 9 million residents to quite simply stay at home.
We direct a statewide order for people to stay at home.
The breaking news, stay at home, that is the order tonight from 4 state governors as the coronavirus pandemic spreads.
I fully recognize that in some cases, I am choosing between saving people's lives and saving people's livelihoods.
In California, the notoriously busy highways are nearly empty.
The hustle and bustle of New York is at a standstill.
More than half of the country's students have been sent home.
Businesses across the country forced to shut their doors.
About a quarter of all restaurants to close as a result of this pandemic.
The coronavirus now has 1 in 4 Americans living in lockdown.
We are looking at a new war that no one has seen before.
Francis, do you think that the reality is that in the face of what felt terrifyingly like an existential threat to so much of our population, U.S. government officials just didn't trust Americans enough to kind of really level with them from the start and say something like, look, these interventions, they are our best guess about what's going to slow this down and save as many lives as possible and get us through this pandemic in the best shape that we possibly can. And to say, essentially, this is a large-scale experiment. And we have to be honest, it's going to involve all these trade-offs, economic, social, academic, psychological. It may hurt a lot of people in the name of saving an unknown number of people, but we think it's going to be worth it. So join us. I mean, that is admittedly a hard message to ask people to join you.
I think under the pressure of the crisis, the public demanding action with the sense of catastrophe unfolding, I think they indulged in a great deal of wishful thinking. And so when advocates of non-pharmaceutical interventions recommended these measures and were optimistic about it, they heard what they wanted to hear. I mean, there